Avoid SQL injection attacks using PDO. As we saw in the previous video, creating an SQL statement by concatenating strings and including a value from an HTML input can be dangerous, as someone could inject some SQL and compromise your database. The problem comes when using quotes. In SQL, quotes are used to denote literal values. Anything contained between two quote characters is the literal value. So if you're dynamically creating an SQL string and you insert a value that contains a quote like this, when the SQL statement is parsed, the quote inside the literal value is taken as the ending quote. Anything after that is interpreted as SQL again, and not a literal string. So here is where you could inject some SQL. The solution is to escape any quote characters. We escape a quote character by putting a backslash in front of it like this. An escaped quote like this is not parsed as the end of the literal string. This way, a literal value can contain a quote character. The simplest way to do this is to insert backslashes before any quotes in the variable using the string replace function, like this. Now if we try and insert some SQL, the quote is escaped and the SQL is not injected. However, as we're using PDO, we have this quote function that escapes the quotes according to the underlying database we're using, as some databases do escaping differently. So if we use this, we don't need to worry about that. So if we change our code to use this function, we're still protected against SQL injection, and it also looks cleaner as we don't need to insert the quotes ourselves. This is fine if you just have one string to add quotes to, but if you have several, the code that creates the SQL string could get messy with lots of concatenations going on. An alternative is to use prepared statements. These allow us to insert parameters into our SQL string, which we then bind to a value. With prepared statements, we insert a placeholder into the SQL string like this, and then once we've prepared the statement, we bind the value of that parameter to a value, in this case the search value coming from our HTML form. Then, instead of using the query function, we execute the statement and fetch the results. If we run this, we're still protected from SQL injection, but our SQL is much easier to read and we don't have messy string concatenations going on. So the best way to protect yourself from SQL injection attacks is to use PDO's prepared statements.